Good afternoon. Welcome back to another rendition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. You are tuned into wide angle portraits with Sony Artisan, master photographer, the man himself, Scott Robert Lim. Scott, what's going on, man?
Hey, happy to be here. Things are kind of getting back to normal and things are great. Can't no complaints.
No complaints. That's good. Well, I finally tracked you down. I was just talking with Scott in the green room there. This man's all over the place. You see him at a show. He's got no less than 30 people around him at any given time. You need to start rolling with security.
Well, sometimes I might have to. No, I'm just kidding. I love it. Man, I love meeting people.
No, it's great. And look, you're one of our favorite guests to have on. It's always fun, always lively. We always learn a ton, and we love your work. So that being said, I'm going to get out of the way. A huge thank you to our host for today's event, Sony, and a huge welcome to everybody joining us across the internet. If you guys do have any questions at all, get those in, and Scott will answer them once he wraps it up here. But Scott, show is all yours.
All right, sounds good. Let me share the screen here, and let's get going here. And okay, I gotta hit the play button, and for some reason it is not cooperating with me because there we go. All right, hope everybody can see that. Wide angle portraits and landscapes. A lot of people, when you say the word portraits, right, you're thinking, oh, I got to get my 85 millimeter lens out, my 50 millimeter lens out. And you don't necessarily think of, oh, I'm going to do a portrait and I'm going to use my 16 to 35 or 20 millimeter 1.8. But they are very essential to kind of completing the entire story of your portrait session or whatever you want to do. So I'm going to tell you 3 powerful techniques on how to use a wide angle lens. This shot here was in Cuba, and I'm using a 16 to 35 lens at f4. And I'm going to show you why you need to use wide angle lenses with your portraits. And let's go. Number 1. Have you guys heard of this term, yin-yang? Opposites create compelling imagery when paired together. That is a very key component to presenting your work, or if you're into cinematography, you definitely know about this technique. And I'm going to unwrap this just a little bit more. You guys see that symbol, right? That's the Chinese symbol for yin and yang, right? Opposites. And so it expresses the idea that even if 2 things seem contradictory, they can be complementary. And you have to use that design technique in your work, and is very, very powerful. So let's just start off with this idea. How many of you guys like, what is this? Hawaiian pizza, right? Now, why do we like Hawaiian pizza? It's because Hawaiian pizza is the perfect combination of sweet and savory flavors with salty bacon and juicy pineapple loaded on top of a crispy crust. Now, it's 12 noon over here in the West Coast, so I hope this made you a little bit hungry, but not so hungry that you'd leave this lecture. But most of us like Hawaiian pizza, right? Because it's got that opposite going, right? You got the pineapple and you got the Canadian bacon. And you know what's so funny about Hawaiian pizza? It's actually invented in Canada. So that's a little known fact. That's why they use Canadian bacon, right? It's from that. So you can see how they use 2 different things that are completely different. You put them together and you go, ooh la la, that's awesome. So let's show this type of pairing. Right here's a yin and yang, and putting 2 different things together. You've got the groom dressed in dark, and then you got the bride dressed in white. I kind of use this whole effect, right? I've got them on this column. They're looking opposite directions, but then I have them, it works together. I connect them in some way by holding hands and it all works together. But this is kind of what I'm talking about, putting opposites together, but it makes a compelling photo. All right, now you can do it in different ways. You can not only do it, visually, but you can also do it with colors. And so they have things called complementary colors. And so if you get this, what they call it, the color grid or what, I forgot what they call it. But if you see the arrows that go opposite from each other, those are complementary colors. And so what's the definition of a complementary color? Well, if you take one color and add it equally to another color and you mix it together, they make gray. So any two colors that you mix together, it will equal gray. This is also important in understanding when you're post-processing. Let's say okay, let's talk about, first of all, what's the most popular complementary colors? You guys know during kind of the holiday season, what do you guys see? Red and green, right? And so let's use that also, not only in our compositions, but also at post-processing. If your photos look a little bit red and you want to gray it out, you can use the complementary color green, add some green to it, and you mix it to go gray. So not only does this work with your compositions, but it also works in so many other things and with your styling, also with your post-processing. But when you see these two things put together, it does very well. Now, look at what I did here. I'm using the complementary colors. And she was, wearing the red. And then I brought this along with me. If you don't know, I stashed these $8 kind of Asian umbrellas with me. They're nylon. They're only a few dollars on Amazon. I suggest you go on Amazon and buy all the colors. I do. And I use it in my design. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, but just adding more red to it allows you to see that complementary colors and it goes together. Now, not only with the colors, you need to pair two different types of lenses when they're paired with each other. And so, like I said before, now look at this photo. You can see it. I'm using an 85mm lens, okay, which gives you a certain type of look. And you can kind of create when you say 85mm lens, a lot of times you're thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to shoot with a portrait and shoot waist up, right? And do that kind of classic portrait feel, shooting waist up. But a lot of times what you can do is shoot with that longer lens full length. And it has a very interesting look because it compresses the background. So it made these columns in Valencia, Spain here, made them even bigger and creates a different look. And I use this all the time with an 85mm or with even a 50mm. I shoot full length. Okay, so here I'm using an 85mm lens, but then also during this same session, I'm shooting with a 16-35 to give me a totally different look. It's in the same area, but it's a completely different look using two different types of lenses. So you can start to add this in your work a lot of times. And so here I have the shot, right? I'm using my classic 50mm 1.2 that I love, right? And it gives you that beautiful portrait here, but it doesn't give context of where you're at, right? And so that's the beauty of using a wide angle lens. I can show you a wider angle. This is a 20mm 1.8, and you get a sense of establishing kind of where you are. And so together, they are very powerful when you put this set together. Maybe you're doing something on Instagram where you're doing like a little gallery thing and you want to add a lot of different shots you can start to put this in your work and they go together. Here's another one. We're in Central Park. I love shooting in this area. And I'm using my 85mm lens, and I'm shooting full length. And then I'm going back in this same area. I'm doing a shot like this with, I believe it's the 12-24. Yeah. So the 12-24 gives a completely different look, but is very complementary. So you got the pineapple and then you got the bacon, right? You putting them together, right? We got the pineapple here with a nice, what am I using? 55mm 1.8 here. And then going wide using my 16-35. So you got the pineapple and you got the Canadian bacon, mix and matching, putting them together, giving you a nice story of where you're at. And it takes work actually to learn how to use these different lenses, especially using the wide angle lens. Your composition skills have to be so much greater because you're allowing more elements in it. Okay, so here's something completely different. Maybe you do sports or something. I'm using my 200-600 lens, I believe. Yeah, so I'm using my 200-600 lens here. I'm on the beach of San Diego, and we're taking some shots, right? And then when they come in, I'm using more of a portrait lens, right? And I'm painting a story with the two different types of lenses, two different types of shots. And here I'm using a 35-1.4 here. Okay, so now you might want to go in, shoot kind of a details, especially at a wedding. You don't have to show your subject all the time, but you can kind of just focus in on some intimate moments. Right here, they're holding hands. You have no idea of where they're at here, but it's showing an intimate moment. Then this is at 70mm at 2.8. And then I'm going 24mm at 2.8. And so that's why, if you got to grab one lens and say you're going light, I love the 24-70. I mean, I used to be, if you know me, I used to be an all prime guy. But as I get a little older here, I'm going to be 60 in a couple months or so. And sometimes I don't like to carry all that gear. And I just want to carry one lens with me because I'll admit it, as I get a little bit older, I get a little bit lazier. Just take one lens. I've been using the 24-70 2.8 a lot because it's so versatile, because it can do things like this. And so I highly recommend that right now you go to the B&H site, boom, buy a 24-70 2.8. I know Sony has their new one, which is amazing. So I am giving you permission. You deserve it. Go ahead. If you don't have one, go ahead and buy one right now. Okay, so here again, going wide, I'm at a wedding. I'm at 24-1.4. And then, which I love this prime lens, which is an amazing lens. It's one of my favorites. And then I'm going into tight, where I'm showing more of a story, right? Using a 55mm 1.8. Here I'm doing a street fair in my hometown of Monrovia, California. It's a quaint little old town area. They would film a lot here. And it's a tight shot. I'm using the 24-70. I'm at 70 right now. And then I go a little wider, showing you that's like it's, some street musicians, giving you both little angles there. Okay, here's another one. You can also use your 24mm lens and kind of go tight with it, right? So as long as you keep the subject in the middle, you can still get a great portrait with a wide angle lens. Let's say even if you want to go waist up, the only thing is keep that subject in the middle so it doesn't distort a lot. and then you can do a nice kind of waist up portrait like this. And then a lot of times for wide angle, sometimes you got to just use whatever you got with you. And I'm using a 24 1.4, but you can see this next shot, I needed to go a little bit wider. And so I did this, but you know what? This is just with my iPhone 12 Max. So you can, start to use your mobile phone, whatever you have. If you have whatever's mobile phone and it has great wide angle shots with it, if you got it, use it. So not only do you have to, can you use your cameras, but basically whatever you got with you nowadays, you can also take some very compelling wide angle shots, even with your mobile phone. Okay, so here's kind of the pairings that I use together in regards to lenses. So there's the portrait. These are the popular portrait lenses that I use. Okay. And then on the other side, here are the wide angle lenses that I like to use. You can ask me questions about these, but these are my favorite wide angle lenses that I like using. I think most of the times my top three would be the 16 to 35, the 24, and the 20, which I really like. Okay, so let's keep going here. That's number two. That's number one, is to kind of use that yin-yang effect. Number two, I'm going to show you how to do some creative wide shots, also referred to as an establishing shot in the film world. So what is an establishing shot? In filmmaking and television, an establishing or wide shot lets the audience know the setting for they're about to watch. Setting including place and often time, both time of, I can't really see what that says because I can't read those words, and potentially time in history. Okay. And so that's what they do. So on every new scene, when you watch movies or television shows, they kind of show you where the scene is about to take place. And a lot of times it has the time setting of night or day, and then they go into the scene. Well, you could do that with your photography, and wide angle lenses are great for doing it. And I'm going to show you some creative ways to have these establishing shots. One is using a standard wide, which we kind of went over. Two is you can use long exposures for that. You can also use a time lapse, which is pretty cool because it's wide, but it also shows you the kind of time of day. And then also, you could also use a thing like a drone, which you might not even thought of, which is a good way to create wide shots. Okay, so here it is. This is an establishing shot. You get it all there. You go, oh, okay, I've been there. Oh, that's Paris, right? I can see what's happening. It's giving context to, oh man, it's at that twilight hour, right? Oh, it's a workshop. It's setting everything up. And then the photo established, there's an amazing photo shoot happening in Paris, right? You're getting all that information. I'm using a 16-35 lens, and then boom, there's the shot. It gives it context, okay? But you established where you were. Now, if you were to see this by yourself, literally that could be anywhere, but when you pair it with the other shot, it gives context to it. So you can do that with a lot of things. So when you're doing a portrait session, don't just, be ripping shots of your subject alone, but you want to get those wide angle shots to kind of set the scene and tell where you are, what time of day, and the setting. Of course, this is Beijing, China. And then when I roll in my other shot, it gives you more context of actually where we are. Okay, you're establishing it. Here, I'm using a long exposure. So that's one way to do it. I believe, what I do this for 8 seconds, I think. What's the 16 to 35? And this is kind of like right when the sun is going down. Let's see if I do that. What was that? F22 at 8 seconds, setting it at ISO 50. because the light wasn't, I mean, it's just when those building lights turned on. So I had to lower the ISO a bit so I could extend it out to 8 seconds. Okay, but it's a different feel. So you can use the long exposure shots. Now, here I am just hand holding something. So I'm doing wide. When you do wide angles, it allows you to drag your shutter a bit and keep things sharp in the background the wider you use. And I'm using a 16 the 35 lens, and you can see I just had it an 1/8 of a second, but I love that motion because it kind of establishes where, you know, the feel of what it's like to be there with all that chaos going. And it kind of disguises the cars a bit because you can't, it could be a little bit more timeless because you can't recognize the car and what year it is. And so that's why I kind of like this shot. It has a bit more of a timeless feel because I blurred out the cars and you can't really see what type of car it is. Okay. Here's another one, same thing. I'm going 30 seconds here just to give that feel of motion using a long exposure. Here I'm doing 18 to 35, 10 to 18. Now this is actually with a crop sensor. I'm not sure. Yeah, this is a crop sensor camera and I'm at f18 here, 3.2 seconds. So these type of shots are really cool that you can add in with your portrait sessions, which actually tell a more interesting story. So that's why I love using time-lapse shots. Here's when I'm in Paris and I'm opening it up. What is that? 1/8 of a second or something, 15th of a second. I actually think I handheld this. I think I just rested my arm on like a railing. And when I'm shooting it around, you know, 15th or 1/8 of a second, I think a lot of times you can get away hand holding some stuff and it's not too bad. Just take a lot of them and you can get a nice picture even hand holding. But the reason why I open it up because I want you to see those trails of the fireworks. Okay, now here is something interesting where I do a time lapse just to give you a feel of what it's like. I'm in Cuba. This is on top where we were staying and I'm shooting across and I'm just, you know, a little time lapse of where you are, you know, what time it is. And you can do that actually on your phone. I'll do another one. You can also do it on your phone, but I'm going to show you a way on how to do a high quality one on your camera, on your Sony camera. So that's just something on your phone, but it just has a different feel to it. So you start to add that even with start thinking this way with your Instagram reels, right? You could use this as part of your reel and then go to the portrait shot. It'll kind of add to your story. But here's another one. And there's a way you could also do this in your camera very easily, especially if you have a Sony camera. And this is what I do if I want a really high quality time-lapse video where my camera puts it all together for me, then I'm going to use this technique. In the Sony cameras, they have something called short and quick settings, S and Q. So if you go to S and Q settings and you set your frame rate to 24 frames per second and you recording frame rate, and then you go to frame rate and you say, I want to shoot 1 photo per second. And then I set the recording speed as the highest quality possible. And so when I put it in this mode, my camera will shoot 1 frame per second. And then when you hit stop recording, it will take all those frames. So if you do, say, 48 pictures or 48 seconds, it's going to give you it's going to take all those 48 shots and compress it down to a 2-second movie, right? So every second is 24 frames. So if you did, you know, 100 pictures or 100 seconds, that would give you 4 seconds of video. And so that's a very quick way. I use this a lot in my camera on how to get a quick, high quality time lapse in my Sony camera. Okay, here's another way, which is drones. And this is an amazing way to use just getting a different perspective and wide angle. And you could even pull frames from your drones now too, but you can start to use it more. People are starting to use it more and more in their work, kind of like a gimbal almost. And so getting into drones definitely is a good way to add a different look into your shots, whether you use the straight video or you pull a frame, but everybody loves drone shots. Now if you don't have a drone, you can do those same types of effects if you just elevate your perspective. And so wherever you're shooting, if you can find something where you can get higher and shoot down, you can get more perspective into your work and create drone-like images, even though you're not using a drone, but elevate your perspective. And here I'm on the Great Wall of China, and I'm, I don't know if you've ever been there, but they have these certain kind of towers that overlooked everything. And so I climbed up there and I shot down, giving me an interesting perspective, because when you're at a higher elevation, you can see depth, right? So the higher you are, the more depth that you can see. And that's what makes it interesting. And I'm using my 16 to 35 millimeter lens here. And then also I'm just in the airplane, right? Airplane's a great way to take establishing shots. You can even roll some video if you want, or take some stills, whatever you want to do, but you're in an elevated situation and you can use that as part of your work. Okay, so last tip here is make your subjects pop off the frame when shooting wide. Wide compositions, or using wide angle lenses, your composition has to be at a higher level. Because why? You're adding more elements into your frame when you're shooting landscape, and then also you're shooting wide. So if you're shooting portrait, you could just zoom into your subject and cut everything out, and life becomes very easy at that point. You don't have to worry about the garbage can behind you, or the distracting tourists, or anything like that. You just go shoot it portrait, and you zoom in all the way on your subject, and you eliminate everything. That's easy. So when you shoot wide, it makes it 10 times harder. And I'm going to show you some tips on how you can take amazing compositions by using this one tip. Okay, and I'm going to show you right now how I do that. So, well, a few tips actually. So one, use doors, archways, and framing. You use the Scott spot technique and styling. So I'm going to show you all these different things on how to add great compositions using wide angle lenses. Now look at this. What did I use? A door, right? And I like the symmetrical elements. The two windows create something symmetrical. And so it kind of forces you to look in the middle. And I've got my subject there right in the middle. And let me ask you a question. If she wasn't wearing that bright, solid dress, would this be as effective? No. So it kind of all goes together. And if you don't know that, I added also a flash on their face, because the sun was actually so high. Because if you look at the windows and you see the shutters, you see how high the sun was, because there's very little shadow. That sun was being blocked by her hat, and so she had shade across her whole face. So I just took a flash on full power and fired it straight into her face to open that up. So not only is the composition do you need, but a lot of times it's what they're wearing, it's how you're posing them, and the lighting. It all has to work together on these things. Okay, so I'm using doorways here. Here's another doorway. I'm shooting a wedding. I create this micro story. I see the symmetry of the doors. I like looking for a lot of symmetry. I got this idea. Oh, I'm going to put the bride in one door and I'm going to cram all those other bridesmaids in the other door. I'm going to make them look at the bride and say, oh, just, look at her and look how amazing, tell her how amazing she looks, and look at her with awe. Like, she's the most beautiful gal on the planet today. Right. And that's the kind of story that I wanted to create, but I'm just using two doors. Two doors gave me that story. Here I'm in Cuba and I'm at this kind of place that used to be a theater. I don't know what it is now. Maybe people live in there. I'm not quite sure. But we waited forever, right, for the cars to go by and to click it right at the perfect moment to use that framing of that door, bam, to capture that shot. Here I'm in, some of you, if you're from New York, you know where this is. This is Central Park. I love shooting that. I'm using an archway to frame them, but let me ask you a question. If I didn't have that simple lighting behind them, would this shot work? No, right? So it's kind of like you need all the elements sometimes to make the shot. And if you just don't have the one, your idea may fail. And so that's why it's great to see a master photographer in work, because he does the little details, he or she or that photographer puts everything together, and a lot of those details that we sometimes forget or don't know how to do, that photographer does it, and you can understand how to put everything together to make the shot. Okay, here's another doorway here, and I'm just posing my friends in this doorway to create that shot. Now, let me ask you a question. If she wasn't wearing a red dress, right, it wouldn't be quite as effective. But we'll get into styling a little bit later. Okay, so here again, using a window this time and waiting until that gondolier comes right by, and then click, taking that shot where she's framed in the window and he's framed in the archway across. Sometimes you got to wait and be patient for shots. That's why you never go on a workshop with your family, because they're not going to wait for you. Okay, so let me get going. We got a few more minutes, and I want to open it up to some questions that you might go. So let's continue this real quickly here. Here I'm using a window of a car to frame my subject. Here I'm using a tree, right? But if she wasn't wearing that dress, it wouldn't be as compelling, or the composition wouldn't work. Okay. Now, here's a busy background. But why does this shot work? It works because of what she's wearing. She's wearing a solid color here, right? That separates her, that simplifies the mind, so you can immediately see her. Her skin tone separates from the detail. And honestly, that hat, if she wasn't wearing that hat, it really wouldn't be as an impressive shot without that hat. So things that you have and accessories really help. Here's another shot. I have those $8 umbrella. Let me ask you, if she didn't have that umbrella, would this shot work? No. You needed the umbrella. You needed, right, the red dress to pop off. If she was wearing a beige dress with a lot of print on it, it would get lost, because I'm going wide. I'm having this subject super small. You need that subject to really pop out. Okay, so styling is a lot of it too, what they're wearing. So why does this person pop off the background? Because one, I'm using a clean background. There's no distractions behind it. It's a bright color. The subject is wearing solid, bright colors to pop off that frame. Elements are simplified, and I'm just using that red yellow combination primary colors, which works. Okay, so here we are again, and I'm using that here's what I call the Scott spot. So what I do in my environment, this is on top of the Sony building, which is cool. We had access to shoot up here. Not very many people get to shoot up here. Hardly anybody, actually, not unless you know somebody at Sony. But anyways, I find a background, and a clean background or backdrop. I put my subjects there, and then I show depth and perspective on the other part of my frame. But if you find that backdrop, your subjects will pop off. And that's what I, affectionately refer to as the Scott spot. Look for the Scott spot or that backdrop and put your subjects there. And that will make your wide angle shots pop off the frame and create order for your photography. This is like the last tip before we finish up here. Leave a few minutes but you see the Scott spot here, right? See that? Put her head right in that little area. So you can think of the rule of thirds and all that kind of stuff, but when you're shooting on location, really looking for that Scott spot, that real clean area where you could put the head of the subject right in so they pop off. Look at what she's wearing. It all works together. Here, let's say if you don't have anything, you could always use the sky and shoot up. And I do this a lot of times when in an area where there's like a million tourists walking around and I need a clean shot of my client or my subject, I just shoot up towards the sky. And so that sky acts as like a clean area where you could put your subject. And so a lot of times I'm shooting at a lower angle to get the head of that subject higher, or in this case, I had her stand on something. So that's it. I'm going to give you a summary of everything. Before I give you a summary, I just want to show you very, very briefly for a few seconds what I got going. Workshop, if you want to learn with me, where I can show you these things live and put this into practice. I'm doing a Joshua Tree, which is in a desert area in California, a 3-day workshop there in May. I'm going to Cuba in October. Which is always an amazing workshop. And I'm also got like 1 or 2 spots left for Paris. If you're interested, that's about sold out. But those are the 3 things that I got coming up. I'm also going to be doing something in Central Park, I believe, with B&H as we get going. But here's my summary, and then we can have like a couple questions if you want later. So 1, use the yin-yang effect where you're using different lenses or complementary colors, right? 2, use establishing shots or wide shots, and you can do that with standard lenses, wide angle lenses. But you could be creative about it. You could use long exposures, you could use time lapse, right? Or you could use a drone or elevated perspective. And then 3, composition is huge. If you don't have great composition with your wide angle shots, they're gonna lose its impact. And we talked about using doorways, archways, and windows. We talked about styling, how important it is and what they're wearing, and also using a clean background or a Scott spot to create that separation and enable for your viewers to see that subject immediately. All right. Oops. So anyways, let me just leave that right here. Well, I keep going 1 too far, so you can get all that. And I think that's about it right there. That's my summary. I'll just turn it back to Derek or whoever. If anybody has any questions I can answer, I'm all good.
Yes, and we'll open the floor up so anybody out there, get those questions in. We're going to start it, Scott, with a question by Jim joining us here on Zoom, asking, how do you post-process to get the colors you have from your beautiful photos?
Wow. Well, that is, I started with Photoshop 0, like the very first. Can you imagine? It must be what, Photoshop 25 right now. I've been doing Photoshop for a long time. It's kind of hard for me to explain, but I kind of, in order for my wide angle shots to look the way they do, you have to have the right lighting. And so I'm very stickler on lighting. And so if you have the right lighting, then you can post-process the photos the way that you see them, how they look. But if your lighting is not right, then the post-processing doesn't really work. So it's in conjunction with lighting and the post-processing style. And I do a lot of cinematic techniques where I color grade them and stuff like that. I literally have, 14 hours of content on how I post process. If he's interested, I can direct him that way.
Definitely. And next question for you, Scott, is being that we're talking about wide angle portraits, right? And a lot of times we see you use off camera flash or continuous light.
Yes.
And we know that, you have to get close, right? A lot of these times you're lighting portraits, you're getting close with the light. When the wider you shoot, obviously it makes
Oh,
it get
yes.
close. Do you composite? How do you work in those situations where you need to use lighting, but you also want to get the light source close enough, but you want to shoot wide?
Right. You definitely have to have enough power to do that with. And so that's huge, because the further back the lighting is going to have to be. And a lot of times when you have diffuse light, it takes away 4 times the power from whatever light source you do. So when I'm shooting wide, a lot of times I'm not using any diffuser at all with my lighting, so I could get maximum power out of it. And because you're shooting wide, it's okay to not use soft light. And I really only need soft light when I'm shooting really close, and the skin, when the skin is prominent, I love using soft light because it makes a portrait look good. But I'm shooting way farther back. Soft light is not as important, so I could use hard light, and it's easier to create more power out of hard light without a diffuser. So that's the short answer.
Okay, perfect. A question from Wendy joining us on Vimeo asking, do you use the in-camera level when using a wide angle?
No, I've been like shooting for 20 years, so I kind of got an eye for that. I remember at the beginning, I was all over the place, right? And it was
still
hard. Yeah, I still do too,
I think there's
but
two camps. There's people that just don't see straight, and I'm one of them. Like I never, you could have like lines and not even shoot wide and have to worry about the distortion. Wendy, I know what you're talking about. Like when you shoot wide, sometimes you're like, wait, do I have to pull out the skew tool, or is it like you kind of throwing off?
Yeah, you know what? I use a general rule: shoot wider than you normally would think, because you can just crop in a little bit, So I give myself some room for error. And I think that's what you have to do, is just give yourself some room for error. But I do all that, and it's like, oh, I skewed it, and now I cut the pinky toe off, and it's not perfect now. Ah.
Have you been watching me edit? It's always like a little piece of the foot, and you're like, why did I compose it? I know I'm shooting wide. Put him in the center.
Okay, I gotta throw this through AI to get that foot back.
And end up with an extra hand.
Yeah, exactly. As you get 6 fingers after that.
Question from Alan joining us on Zoom. With wide angle portraits, you talked about keeping the subject in the center. What else do you need to do to minimize big feet, big foreheads, big noses? Well, don't shoot me, because I got two of them.
Yeah, it depends on the lens. Are you guys looking at my frame, or I'm not sure what you guys are looking at. So anyways,
we're seeing you. We don't have the shared screen up, so we're seeing you. So if there's anything
you're seeing me. Okay, perfect. Yep. So there we go. So I use, it depends on the lens. So if you're shooting wide angle, right, and then you're shooting profile with somebody who has a larger nose, that's not good. So the posing technique, along with the perspective, along with the lens, all has to work together to maximize the beauty of your subject. So that's why it's just not like one thing. What I'm trying to get at, if you know the theme of this, is that it's several skills put together to create that great image. Sometimes it's lighting can minimize the actual slimming of a person too. Putting the shadows in the right places makes them thinner. It's the lens you use, it's the perspective, it's the composition. So they all have to work together. So that's why hands-on workshops with like a master, you're going to learn so much, because they put all those things together within 30 seconds, some things that you wouldn't actually think of.
Definitely. Well,
because photography is hard, honestly. I mean, it's extreme. It takes you a lifetime to master it, and I'm still making mistakes, and I've been shooting for over 20 years.
I'm glad you brought that up. I brought your name up yesterday, Scott. So I don't know if your ears were ringing at all. Uh, I was on the phone with Jeff Berlin, and we were
Oh
talking
yeah.
about all this. And it's like one of those things where it's like Jeff's same thing. He's been shooting for so long. Sometimes it's hard to pull out things to teach because a lot of it is just inherent in what you do now. You see something and you're processing it differently than somebody who might be starting out. So you're 5 steps in because you're already like, well, I don't need to worry about my brain's here. You're seeing the field automatically. So a lot of times it's like you're just reacting. It's second nature. It's become inherent in what you do.
It's kind of like, let's say you don't have lighting mastered. All your energy and focus is on how to get the right lighting, and then you're missing the composition, you're missing the posing, you're missing how the hand should be posed because you're stuck on one thing. So in order for you to just flow in a situation, you've got to know those 4 components. For me, posing, lighting, composition for sure, and even post-processing to finish it. So you have to master. That's why I feel like I didn't really fall into my own until I mastered all 4 of those things, which contributed to my signature style. But I had to master all 4 because my work was so all over the place. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was mediocre, sometimes it was great. It's just, you got to have all 4.
Definitely. And with wide angle, we talk about hands-on, right? Getting hands-on. And with wide angle, especially, it's the reverse of like an 85 1.2 or 1.4, where it's like 85 1.2 wide open. You have your person, it's like the background's completely blown out. Everything looks good or professional, no matter what you do. And when you go wide angle, inherently everything's more in focus than it is when you have the compression of a telephoto or medium telephoto. So you have to pay attention to composition. And the same position that you might take a picture of me with a wide angle lens, and it might be more forgiving to have the distortion, and you can play with the distortion. It kind of gives a cool look. Whereas for the next person, it might not fit. It might not fit their features. It might not fit their style, or it might not fit the overall style that you're going for. If you're going for the images that you showed are all beautiful, glamorous, that might not fit the mold if I'm in the photo because it's not going to be or glamorous. So you're going to take that, and it's like, it's a lot.
I hear what you're saying. You might need to go the other way on a subject, even though you are beautiful, Derek. Right. And you might need to exaggerate it. I mean, you know what I mean? So sometimes there are features that seem like they're not beautiful. Sometimes that makes them who they are. And actually, sometimes people like it exaggerated because that's who they are, right?
Yeah.
It's all about telling the story that you want to create and using the tools and the lighting and the perspective on the story that you want to create. And you should be able to, as a master photographer, as you grow, be able to tell whatever story you want to through the tools that you use.
Definitely. Well, you're giving them a good start here. We're going to be having a couple more workshops with you in the coming months. And obviously now is your chance. We gave them the fair warning for July. You're going to be in the beautiful Central Park, as some of the images that you guys saw there were from Central Park. So we're going to have Scott back in Central Park this summer. So in person, hands-on. We haven't been able to do it. We did it with you last time in the store. I think 2019. We had you in the store.
Oh my God. Okay. Yeah.
Lighting demo. We walked down to the little lighting section.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. So we're gonna do it up this time.
We're gonna take a step up and go to Central Park.
We got to step it up. Definitely. Well, Scott, I want to thank you, obviously, for coming on and imparting your knowledge, wisdom, and experience on us. Huge thank you to Sony for hosting this event. Any closing words? Any last, events you have coming up that you forgot to mention?
Not really. If you just go to scottrobertstudio.com, that's my link tree, and I've got whatever I got going is on there. And so it's like every single week, I'm literally adding 1 or 2 more events that I'm doing. So you can reach me there.
That's awesome. Well, huge thank you again. Always great to have you on, Scott, and always great to have all of our viewers here learning for free with us. Be sure to check Scott's website, check his Instagram out, and check our Instagram out at BH Event Space on Instagram. It's not too bad. But that's all we have for today. Another rendition of the B&H Virtual Event Space is in the books. Catch y'all next time.